Hey Peter, so here we are, another weekend coming up with a British fighter defending a world heavyweight title. So, what a great time we're having. This one is Tyson Fury against Deontay Wilder. It's taking place on Saturday, the 9th of October at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. So, really exciting fight, really exciting scenario. I'm just going to lay out how we got here a bit and what to expect. Obviously, this is the third match. This is the rubber match between these two. They've fought each other consecutively now. So, both of them are coming off the initial fight in 2019, which was a split points draw. And then in 2020, we had the rematch where Tyson absolutely dominated and stopped Wilder in the 7th round when his trainer threw the towel in. And now we're coming into the trilogy fight. Like I said, the rubber match. This fight, obviously, we were thinking Tyson was going to go and box Joshua, but that was scuppered by Wilder's legal team, who enforced the rematch clause. So here we are with the third fight. So what can we expect in this fight? Well, let's look back at their respective records. So obviously, Deontay Wilder, we've got has had 44 fights. 42 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. Out of those 42 wins, he's had 40 stoppages. So, a devastating puncher. Interestingly enough, I think it's worth this statistic as well. Even with that many fights, Deontay has only boxed 150 rounds. Because a lot of those fights were obviously very early stoppages, particularly in his early career. Tyson stands at 31 fights with 30 wins and 1 draw, that draw coming against Deontay Wilder. He has actually boxed 193 rounds, which I think is an interesting stat. And if you look at their respective records, Tyson was matched kind of harder earlier on, and Deontay was kind of blowing people away earlier on. People were losing records. So despite being a devastating puncher, it's maybe slightly generous to him, that sort of devastating KO record. Looking a bit deeper into the records, I think let's recap how we got here. In the first fight, like I say, it was a split decision draw. And we had the sort of, Tyson was knocked down in the 3rd round and again in the 12th round when he had that miraculous sort of resurrection, comeback at the end of the 12th round. But he was winning the fight quite comfortably, boxing in that sort of, in a way, kind of awkward move away, jab and move way that he did. And Deontay, like I said, caught up with him in the 3rd and knocked him down, caught up with him in the 12th, knocked him down where you thought this is the end of the fight. Tyson got up and then came straight at Deontay Wilder for the last 30 seconds of the fight, pushed him back and kind of, and won that round, and probably was winning the rounds that he was knocked down in, outside of that. So anyway, it was seen as a bit of an unfair split draw. So Wilder retained the title. Then they came into the rematch just before the pandemic in February 2020. Now, in this fight, a totally different scenario. Tyson dominated. He changed trainers. He got rid of Ben Davison. He brought in Sugar Hill Stewart, known as a more aggressive trainer, the way he trains fighters to be more aggressive and punch, the nephew of Emmanuel Stewart. And Tyson went straight at Wilder from the bell, pushed him backwards, dominated him for 7 rounds until finally Mark Breland threw the towel in round 7, and what was a one-sided beating, really, especially considering that Deontay was defending the title. So now we come into the 3rd fight, and Deontay has changed trainers. There was a real bad stink after the 2nd fight. Obviously, he got rid of Mark Breland. He sacked him, reinstated him, sacked him again. He then got rid of Jay Diaz, and he's gone with Malik Scott. So an unusual choice that I'll come to a bit later. Tyson is keeping the same training team in place. And obviously, they've both had this long gap. But for once, we can't look at this. It's not like one fight has had a long gap and the other one has been busy in between, because they've just gone into these fights with each other. I thought it was worth delving into their records as well to kind of explain why I think the 2nd fight happened and what's going to happen in the 3rd, and to look at their rematches. If you look at Tyson's record, Tyson's had 3 rematches in his career. Deontay has had 3 rematches in his career. And if you look at how they did, interestingly enough, in Tyson's 8th pro fight, he boxed John McDermott. Now, John McDermott was a very good, very strong, maybe domestic level fighter, but he'd had 30 fights at this stage, John, 25 wins and 5 losses. And it was only Tyson's 8th fight. Interestingly, I was ringside for that fight. And in my opinion, Tyson did lose that fight. He was blowing very heavily at the end. But like I say, he was young and he was inexperienced. And I thought McDermott won that fight. They rematched 2 fights later. But like I said, the decision by referee Larry O'Connell at the end of that fight was that Tyson won. So they rematched 2 fights later, and Tyson dominated and stopped McDermott in the 9th. He is a very clever, boxer. He works you out. And while he was developing at that stage as well, he does seem to be able to work people out in fights and, work out how to win. And like I say, in the rematch, he did very well. Then a few fights later, he boxed Derek Chisora. He won that fight on points, but, Chisora definitely had his moments. And, it was a close-ish fight, but Tyson did win that fight. rematched Chisora a few fights later and completely dominated and stopped Chisora in the 10th. So, he does seem to work people out in rematches. Then, of course, we come into the Deontay Wilder fight, which, as I've already said, the first one was a split draw, although I'll say Tyson was very out of shape. The second one, he completely dominated. The interesting thing about that fight to me is that was almost one continuous fight. If you look at that fight, as I say, Tyson was kind of moving around, using his boxing skills to negate and to try not to get, hit by Deontay, who's got that awesome power. And, it was working quite well. He was outboxing him, but obviously he did get caught and went down those 2 times. After the second knockdown, like I call it the resurrection knockdown, he got up and I think he just thought, this shit will bust. I've got to go for it. And he went straight for Wilder, which is contrary to what you would expect someone who's just been knocked down, particularly that heavily, to do. You'd expect him to sort of recoup and go back and work behind the jab. But he went straight at Wilder, and knocked him back and knocked him around for the last 30 seconds of the fight. And I think at that point, Tyson in his own head said, this is how I fight this guy. This is what I do. Because if you look at round 1 of the second fight, it was like round 13 of the first fight. He just did exactly the same thing. He did after that knockdown. He went straight for Wilder, knocked him back, kind of took his legs away from him, took his power away from him and dominated the fight. So like I say, a very smart fighter who kind of works people out. And if we go to Wilder now and look at his rematches, there was Bermane Steverin, who initially won the WBC title from, and that was the first time Wilder had ever been the distance, and so he won on points over 12 rounds quite comfortably. He rematched Steverin and knocked him out in a round. I think that's a little bit flattering to Wilder because Steverin was drafted as a late replacement, was out of shape and unmotivated. Then he boxed Luis Ortiz. Now this fight is interesting because he boxed Luis Ortiz and stopped Luis Ortiz in the 9th. The first time they fought, he did have a very wobbly moment in there, but he was winning on points when he beat Ortiz, when he stopped Ortiz in that fight. Then he rematched Ortiz a few fights later, and he was losing on points, getting comprehensively outboxed. And you're thinking he's really going to come unstuck here before he found, that real equaliser in the 7th and stopped Ortiz. So on paper, that looks like a better result. Stopped him in the 9th, stopped him in the 7th. But if you actually look at the way the fight played out, he was getting comprehensively outboxed by Ortiz in the second fight. So he hadn't kind of worked him out, as we say. Then, of course, he comes into the rematch, like I say, the third rematch in his career is with Tyson Fury, and, a split draw, and then totally dominated in the second fight. So there are similarities between the records there. So what can we expect in the third fight? Well, looking at it, Tyson is going with what worked so well last time. Looking at the way that he dominates in rematches, you would think now coming into his first ever rubber match, again, the same thing's going to happen. So if you extrapolate from that, you think, well, Tyson's going to completely dominate this fight. What has Wilder gone away and done? Well, he got rid of, as we said, he's got rid of Jay Diaz and Mark Breland, and he's gone with Malik Scott. Now, Malik Scott is a bit of an unusual choice. Malik Scott, obviously known as a fighter, he did fight Wilder, although he's a long-term friend of Wilder's. Was a very good amateur. I think he only lost 3 times as an amateur. He lost 3 times as a pro, and to Zora, Wilder, and Ortiz. So, a very good fighter, but not known as a trainer. He was just training kids, back in his hometown. And like I say, he's been a long-term associate of Wilder, and Wilder said, come in and train me. They seem to have developed a very good rapport, and we've seen the odd clip coming up of them doing pads. And when you see them doing pads, and what that tells you, they seem to be doing some kind of smarter stuff, sidestepping and hooking and all that sort of stuff, and the things that you might need to do against a Tyson charging at you. But again, Malik Scott doesn't have a proven track record as a trainer. You would expect someone of Wilder's level to go when fighters change trainers at this level. They often go with a very respected person. They'll go to Freddie Roach, they'll go to Buddy McGirt. These type of people who kind of resurrect careers. But he's chosen to go with Malik Scott. So it seems to be, although they do seem to have a great rapport, a kind of untested trainer going in there. So I think looking at it in the round, the logical conclusion might be to say, this is going to be an easier fight for Tyson. He's going to dominate as he did before. I don't kind of think that is going to happen. I'm going to give Wilder a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in this scenario, and I'll tell you for why. I think in the second fight, although he came out with myriad excuses, and again, this is another thing to say that really the only way to correct your mistakes is to admit that you made a mistake in the first place, which he's never seemed to have done with the second fight. He seemed to have brushed it under the carpet by saying Tyson's gloves were loaded, the suit was too bad, Breland was in on a conspiracy and all that sort of rubbish. But looking at that fight, the one thing he didn't say, the excuse he didn't make, if you look at him, he got caught very early on. He looked almost partially concussed, discombobulated. His balance was shot. He was bleeding from the left ear for very early on that fight. So I think he had a perforated eardrum, and that sort of kind of shot his balance out. So I do think he was caught by surprise, like I say, totally discombobulated, and didn't really give a good account of himself. So in that respect, I'm going to give him a bit of a benefit of the doubt. I think he's very motivated for this fight. I don't think he's just coming for the payday. He has fought tooth and nail with his legal team to get this rematch. So I think he's going to be hugely motivated for it. The rumour is, and the weigh-in is going to be interesting, that he's put on a bit of weight. I mean, good weight, muscle weight. So he's obviously looking to not to be bossed around by Tyson so much. And for those reasons, I think he's going to give a bit better account of himself. And also, I don't think he's going to be shocked by what Tyson did in the first fight so much, because he's going to be kind of expecting that. Tyson, on the other hand, there are some rumours that he hasn't prepared so well. I don't believe those rumours. For all his troubles outside the ring, which has been well documented, you've never seen Tyson Fury come into the ring, looking particularly out of shape or looking particularly mentally not there. So I expect him to be focused on this fight. He knows how dangerous Wilder is, and Wilder's always got that equalising punch. But I don't think he's going to be able to completely bet on that Wilder this time and just think, eventually I'll catch up with him, which is what he always did in his previous fights. For weighing up all those factors, Peter, like I say, it's very tempting to say Tyson is going to steamroller him. As John Fury, his dad, has said, this is going to be just another one-sided beating, and it's going to be an earlier stoppage than the 7th round that it was last time. My feeling is Wilder's going to give a better account of himself, and I think he's not going to be able to be steamrolled so easily this time. He's always dangerous with that punch. He knows he has the power to hurt Tyson. Interestingly enough, really, they know they both have the power to hurt each other. Now, both having knockdowns in the respective fights. But I feel it's going to be a late stoppage for Tyson, possibly points for Tyson, but I'm going to go with a late stoppage around 10 or 11 for Tyson. On the grounds that I think Deontay, will have made some decent adjustments with Malik Scott, that he wasn't himself in the second fight, got caught very early. So that's the way I see it playing out. But I do see it as a Fury victory. I think he's 3-1 on to get the win. But like I say, I think Wilder will give us something. There may be some moments. He's always got that power, and he'll be definitely looking to deploy that big equaliser, which has got him out of the hole in so many fights. So again, I do think it's a tremendously exciting weekend. It's an interesting fight to see how it plays out. Like I say, I think the weigh-in will be interesting, because Tyson came in very heavy last time, and Wilder was on his usual weight, so he was significantly outweighed. Be interesting to see how they play that, and really looking forward to the weekend. Like I say, T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, October the 9th. It's going to be great.